Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. So numerous. It's my great pleasure to introduce Katayoun Shahandeh, who is a SOAS alumna. She finished her PhD last year.
Nearly 2 years ago.
Yes, 2 years ago. That's right. Yes. And she presently teaches at SOAS in History of Art and Museums. Also is the convener of the MA Contemporary Art and the Global, and also the convener of the PG postgraduate diploma module analyzing and exploring the museum. So very busy with teaching and marking at the moment. But she's also a researcher, and she has organized conferences, has given lectures, and also published on the topic of contemporary Iranian art, in particular contemporary Iranian women artists. And in fact, tonight, Kati will present Subversive Feminine Contemporary Iranian women artists challenging gender paradigms. And we are really looking forward to this seminar. Please mute your phone. And for the colleagues online, the people online, please write your questions or comments on the chat, and I will read it aloud at the end of the seminar. And yes. Okay, thank you, Kati, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Contadini, both for the invite. And what Professor Contadini didn't mention is that she was my supervisor for my dissertation, for my PhD, under her watchful eyes. So otherwise it wouldn't have been as smooth as it was. So before I start, I've got to also mention that this is part of the chapter that's being published shortly by Bloomsbury in a book titled Gender and Art in the Global South, Intersections. The emergence of Iranian women artists is inseparable from a history that denied them visibility. For centuries, women were utilized as symbols, but denied authorship. Their contemporary presence exposes this history and overturns the structures that once kept them unseen. The rise of women artists in contemporary Iran, therefore, constitutes not a gradual evolution, but a decisive break. A moment in which the feminine self becomes a subject of representation, critique, and political force. In the decades following the 1978-79 revolution, this break has unfolded with remarkable intensity as women artists transformed the visual field into a site where gendered power, visibility, and selfhood are renegotiated. This paper examines the evolving self-representation of Iranian women in contemporary art and the ways in which female artists have strategically reimagined the feminine self in response to systematic forms of gendered control. It centers on artists who engage critically with the aesthetics of femininity, interrogating dominant narratives imposed by the Islamic Republic, and reworking symbols of tradition and visibility. By foregrounding the body, veiled, fragmented, erased, or hypervisible, these artists resist both internalized state discourses and external Orientalist imaginaries. Through varying practices, they open space for what I term subversive femininities, embodied, self-fashioned forms of agency that disrupt state-sanctioned norms and patriarchal expectations. Building on a feminist and post-colonial framework, this paper will analyze the ways in which Iranian women artists negotiate visibility, resistance, and selfhood by focusing on a small group of artists, both living in Iran and its diaspora, each of whom reconfigures notions of the feminine self in distinct yet overlapping ways. Their practices reveal the complexities of negotiating identity in a state that polices gender representation, while also speaking back to international audiences that often construe Iranian women through reductive binary frameworks. These artists offer a lens through which to understand how resistance can be staged not only in overt political critique, but also through the subtle strategies of irony, fragmentation, repetition, and excess. By tracing how these artists engage with the politics of display, of the body, of gender, of national and cultural symbols, I argue that contemporary Iranian women artists construct counter-images that challenge both internal and external modes of control. The practices exemplify how art can operate as a space of critical negotiation, where the feminine self is not fixed or given, but continuously made, unmade, and remade in response to structures of power. Whether through direct confrontation or subtle irony, many of these artists use their work to expose and dismantle the ideological structures that shape women's lived experiences under the Islamic Republic and beyond. Within a system where the state imposes rigid cultural and gender norms, their artworks articulate a politics of ambiguity, reflecting the instability of identity when personal subjectivity is subjugated to state-prescribed ideals. This instability is particularly acute for women, whose identities are persistently constructed through the dual pressures of religious nationalism and global cultural expectations. By navigating the intersection of these forces, many Iranian women artists not only challenge dominant narratives, but also reveal the fractures within them, highlighting the complexities of living as gendered subjects under authoritarian regimes and in post-colonial modernities. Their work thus becomes both a site of personal negotiation and a form of resistance that resonates across broader geographies of power and inequality. The Iranian Revolution, 1978-79, and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under the doctrine of Velayat-e-Faqih, guardianship of the Islamic jurist, the role of women in Iranian society came under intense scrutiny and control. The new regime restructured society along rigid lines of gender, ethnicity, religion, and political ideology, systematically relegating women to the domestic sphere as wives, mothers, and supporters of men, rather than recognizing them as autonomous individuals. Many of the legal rights women had gained in the preceding decades were swiftly dismantled. Among the most significant rollbacks was the abolition of the family protection laws, which had previously granted women greater legal security in matters of marriage and divorce. In their absence, men were once again granted unilateral rights to divorce and child custody. The minimum legal age of marriage for girls was lowered from 18 to 9, and practices such as temporary marriage and polygamy were reinstated. In the legal system, women's testimony was valued at half that of men's, and under SOAS retribution laws, both the compensation for a woman's life and her inheritance was set at half of a man's. In addition to these legal and institutional changes, women's everyday lives were subjected to strict codes of conduct and surveillance. Compulsory veiling was enforced alongside bans on makeup, brightly colored or form-fitting clothes, and even nail polish. Public spaces, including schools, sites of gender segregation. Women were barred from studying nearly half of the academic disciplines at university, from holding high-ranking political and judicial positions, and excluded from certain sports, including participation in the Olympic team. Singing and dancing in public and traveling or working without a husband's permission. Infractions of these rules carried severe penalties. Women could face up to 74 lashes or imprisonment, ranging from 10 to 60 days for violations of the mandatory hijab laws. Arastu Furuhar Science offers one of the clearest visual articulations of how these gendered powers operate through the banal mechanisms of state instruction. In this series, Furuhar appropriates the graphic language of traffic and public safety signage, red circles, diagonal bands, schematic figures, to expose how women's behavior in the Islamic Republic is similarly regulated, codified, and policed. The pictograms appear innocuously familiar, yet they restage the architecture of gender segregation as a system of warnings and prohibitions. The veiled female figure is repeatedly enclosed within red boundaries, crossed out, separated from men, or compressed by encroaching arrows. Whereas the male silhouette retains articulated limbs, upright posture, and crucially, mobility, the woman appears as a closed, monolithic block of color, an anonymous object to be controlled rather than a person endowed with agency. Across the series, Furuhar visualizes the legal and social hierarchies that determine women's lives, from spatial segregation in buses and metro carriages to the unequal valuation of men's and women's lives in Iranian law. Even the scale and orientation of the figures carry symbolic weight. The woman is shown diminished, bowing, or taking up half the space of the man, echoing jurisprudential inequalities that render her rights literally half of those of men. The effect is devastatingly simple. The everyday rules and prohibitions governing women's bodies are distilled into stark, universalized icons that resemble instructions rather than critiques, mirroring how state power often cloaks ideology beneath the neutral veneer of bureaucratic communication. Furuhar's strategic use of the visual register of official signage enables her critique to unfold with disarming clarity. These images confront viewers with the mechanisms of oppression, not as dramatic events, but as normalized semiotics of daily life, where movement, proximity, and the very act of occupying space become subject to regulation. The humor embedded in some of the signs, their almost absurd straightforwardness, only deepens a critique, revealing the illogic of a system that reduces gender relations to cartoon-like instructions. By transforming the visual language of restriction into a tool of subversion, Furuhar makes visible the way patriarchal authority embeds itself in the most banal forms of public communication. Her work thus exposes how inequality becomes neutralized, not through spectacle, but through the repetitive, instructional, almost invisible codes that govern women's behavior. In this way, signs stands as a powerful example of how contemporary Iranian women artists decode, appropriate, and ultimately undermine the visual infrastructures that sustain patriarchal control. However, contrary to reductive narratives of Iranian women as passive victims of state oppression, women have long acted as agents of negotiation, adaptation, and resistance within the very structures that seek to regulate them. Many young Iranian women, in particular, subvert state-imposed dress codes by reclaiming appearance through clothing, posture, gesture, and artistic self-fashioning as a mode of embodied dissent. Shirin Aliabadi's Miss Hybrid and City Girls series exemplify this dynamic. Her Uptown Girls capture the irreverent, playful, and pointedly transgressive attitude of many young women in urban Iran who, in direct defiance of the regime's prescriptions, embrace a self-stylization informed by Western aesthetics and global consumer culture. These figures occupy a hybrid cultural space shaped by traditional Iranian upbringing, yet drawn to the cosmopolitan imagery and commodities circulating beyond Iran's border. Rather than donning the modest chador, they adapt the compulsory veil to their own terms, wearing brightly colored headscarves pushed back to reveal significant portions of hair, in clear contravention of state regulations governing both style and color. Their appearance is further transformed through elective cosmetic interventions, rhinoplasty with surgical tape displayed publicly as a status symbol, colored contact lenses, and bleached hair collectively work to disrupt, refashion, or even erase certain Eastern markers of femininity. Aliabadi's subjects pose with deliberate provocation, accentuating their desirability and commanding the viewer's gaze, an attitude diametrically opposed to the state's ideal of the modest, invisible, proper Muslim woman. In doing so, they challenge not only the regime's moral codes, but also the viewer's assumption about Iranian womanhood. Their self-presentation becomes an act of visual insubordination, revealing the extent to which femininity in Iran is continually negotiated, performed, and contested. Through these images, Aliabadi illuminates the subtle yet potent ways in which young women reclaim agency over their bodies and identities within a system designed to discipline both. Despite restrictions, women also expanded their presence in education, literature, cinema, and the arts. The post-revolutionary period witnessed an increase in women artists participating in exhibitions, both nationally and internationally. This complex reality, wherein women navigate state control while asserting cultural and intellectual agency, forms the background against which the works of many Iranian women artists must be understood. To navigate these ideological pressures, many Iranian artists have developed a nuanced visual language grounded in metaphor, symbolism, and allegory, strategies that enable subversion under conditions of state scrutiny and censorship. These metaphorical strategies are not merely aesthetic choices, but political necessities, allowing artists to veil critique beneath culturally sanctioned signs. Among the most potent recurring motifs is the female body itself, coded as both an object of regulation and a site of resistance. The body becomes a palimpsest where competing discourses of nationhood, religion, and modernity converge, marking it as central to both personal identity and collective struggle. In this context, the visual depiction of the female forms serves a dual function. It reflects internal tensions between imposed and inhabited identities, and simultaneously contests dominant narratives, whether issued by the state or perpetuated by Western cultural imaginaries. In Shiite orthodoxy and Iranian patriarchal culture, the female body has long functioned as a contested terrain, central to constructions of male honor and national morality. Within this framework, women's bodies are not only personal, but deeply political, symbolically linked to the integrity of the Islamic State. Post-1979, the Islamic Republic institutionalized this logic through legal and social mechanisms that tightly regulate female behavior, appearance, and mobility, as explained earlier. Yet it is precisely this intense focus on the female body that renders it a powerful site of defiance. For many Iranian women artists, the body becomes a central site of both personal and political resistance, simultaneously a symbol of state control and a locus of agency. Through feminist aesthetics rooted in personal experience and collective memory, these artists challenge state-imposed and Western-inflected narratives of identity, reclaiming subjectivity through subversive and self-reflexive strategies. Their work examines visual presentation alongside socio-political frameworks, asserting control over the production of meaning and knowledge. By staging the body, often through potent signifiers like the veil, as a terrain of struggle and reclamation, they expose the constraints on women's autonomy while confronting the cultural mechanisms that define and regulate womanhood in Iranian society. The body is thus not simply a natural entity, but a construct influenced by symbolic meanings and historical contexts that shape individual and collective identities. As Judith Butler points out, the body imposes boundaries on the symbolic interpretations it gives rise to, but it is always subject to a symbolic representation. The idealized body cannot be comprehended based on the actual body. Rather, it can only be comprehended in connection with another culturally established fantasy that asserts itself as the literal and the real. In this manner, the body becomes a metaphor for the self, and attempts to censor the body, such as veiling or other restrictions, become attempts to censor the self and contain it. The female body in this art is therefore often a metaphorical battleground where cultural meanings and personal identities intersect and collide, thereby becoming a powerful symbol through which these artists explore autonomy and self-expression. By participating in the definition and redefinition of sexuality, gender, and ideals of beauty, their work not only reaffirms the significant impact of visual representation on the construction of female identity, but also serve as acts of resistance and defiance against these norms. Katayoun Karami, who lives and works in Iran, often uses her own body as a canvas to express the experiences and challenges of the post-revolutionary generation. which has been shaped by revolution, war, immigration, and other traumas. In Resurrected, Karami poses as the dead or suffering Christ with a crown of thorns made of barbed wire and cascading hair covering her bare breasts. The image is overlaid by broken glass, further emphasizing the broken and wounded body, and crudely written inscriptions smudged in places in English and Persian that include the repeated words atheist, prophet, and justice. These words highlight the duality in Iranian society and the increasing dichotomy between personal beliefs and the demands of state and society. Tension marked by the dissonance between private convictions and the ideological conformity often required in public life. This split reveals the psychological and social strain of navigating a system where one's inner truth must be hidden or strategically expressed, reflecting the broader struggle for authenticity, agency, and freedom of thought within an environment shaped by religious dogma and political control. Additionally, the use of Christian imagery and English text makes the piece more accessible to an international audience, allowing them to better interpret the messages and understand the broader context, unlike works that rely solely on Persian script or Iranian Islamic iconography. At the top of the image, written in Persian, are the words woman, which means zan, and free, azad, with the word leader in English between them. This not only suggests Karami's feminist inclinations, but also carries an intriguing prophetic element foreshadowing the emergence of the slogan, Woman, Life, Freedom. The slogan was used in protest more than a decade later following the death of Mahsa Amini on 16th September 2022, after she was arrested and fatally beaten for purportedly failing to comply with the state's failing rules. Karami has stated that the emotional impetus behind this series stemmed from the trauma of witnessing the public execution of Soheila Qadiri, a woman labeled a prostitute who had killed her newborn child, an act she reportedly undertook to spare the child a life of suffering. For Karami, this moment encapsulated the brutal intersection of state violence, gendered precarity, and social abandonment. Her performance as a crucified figure, suspended between martyrdom, shame, and sanctity, translates this grief into visual form. By embodying a figure culturally coded as both divine and transgressive, Karami enacts a radical empathy that blurs victim and perpetrator, sinner and saint, revealing the psychic toll of structural oppression. The gesture of resurrection becomes not a celebration of transcendence, but a haunting return to unhealed wounds and unresolved injustices. Moreover, as a Muslim woman, Karami's adoption of Christ's imagery, a concept doctrinally rejected in Islam, where Jesus is seen as prophet but not divine, introduces a deliberate tension between cultural identity and religious iconography. This act of visual blasphemy is neither naive nor gratuitous. It is a calculated form of subversion that challenges patriarchal interpretation of both Islamic and Christian traditions. It questions whose suffering is sanctified, whose voices are erased, and who is permitted to occupy symbolic space. Art historian Marcia Miskimen has noted how male artists such as Albert Dürer, Paul Gauguin, Salvo, and Stephen Seameyer have historically depicted themselves as Christ figures, conflating the suffering artist with spiritual transcendence. This association elevates male creativity to a quasi-divine status, transforming marginalization into a performative claim to moral authority. Karami's work may echo such strategies, consciously or not, but her embodiment introduces gender and geopolitical dimensions that fundamentally alter their implications. In her case, crucifixion is not a posture of sanctified genius, but a confrontation with the brutalities of womanhood under regulatory control, of dissent punished through spectacle. The title of this piece, Rastapis, meaning resurrection, also refers to the name of Iran's only legal political party from March the 2nd, 1975 to November the 1st, 1978, founded by the Shah. This party may have ultimately been instrumental in the downfall of the Pahlavi regime, as its mandatory membership and associated dues, seen as taxes, alienated previously apolitical Iranians, particularly the Bazaris, the merchant class. Similarly, the party's perceived interference in various aspects of people's lives, including politics, economy, and religion, further contributed to the discontent among certain segments of society. In invoking this word, Karami signals the complex overlay of personal, political, and historical resurrection. She turns a loaded term into a layered metaphor, where return is not about salvation, but reckoning. Understanding resurrected thus requires attending not only to Karami's personal biography as a woman and artist in Iran, but also to the religious, political, and visual languages she draws upon and reconfigures. Her work navigates the fissures in Iranian society where gender, faith, and artistic freedom collide and transforms them into potent sites of critical reflection. A central theme in Resurrected, therefore, as in the work of many women artists, is a reclamation of the female body from its historically passive, voiceless role, cast as an object for the male gaze rather than as a subject of its own narrative. Across feminist art history, women have challenged dominant visual regimes by subverting conventional portrayals of femininity and asserting their own representational agency. Self-representation has emerged as a particular potent strategy in this regard, allowing artists to inhabit their images on their own terms. By using her own body as a site of meaning, Karami resists both the politicized control of women's bodies in Iranian society and the aesthetic codes that have long framed women as mere muses within the art historical canon. Her performance in Resurrected is not simply autobiographical, but a deliberate political and artistic act, one that challenges prevailing narratives, asserts visibility, and redefines the female subject as active, complex, and irreducibly human. In doing so, Karami joins a lineage of women artists who disrupt both socio-political and artistic orthodoxies, carving out space for new modes of seeing, knowing, and being. Self-representation encompassing both personal and collective identities has thus become a vital tool for exploring the self and intervening in historical depictions of women as objects rather than subjects. The connection between the visual portrayal of women and their political authority is evident, as power is wielded by those who control representation in its broadest sense. For women, reclaiming this representational space is both an aesthetic and political act. Importantly, this pursuit has not involved mimicking dominant, often male visual languages. Rather, many female artists reimagine the very foundations of representation itself. By claiming authorship over their own image, they challenge inherited narratives and assert a political voice. These self-portraits often move beyond the individual, using the self as a conduit for collective experience and addressing broader social, cultural, and political concern. In this way, contemporary women artists humanize abstract political ideas, forging a feminist mode of visual personification that reinforces the axiom that personal is political. Whether through depictions of themselves or of other women, these works articulate shared experiences, amplify marginalized voices, and reframe the female subject as both agent and witness. Sinin Keramati exemplifies this approach in her various self-portrait works. In the video piece, Self-Portrait 2007 to 2008, she appears against a stark black background, dressed in a high-neck, black outfit and headscarf, seemingly dissolving into her surroundings. Approximately a minute in, a black liquid begins to seep over her left eye, gradually engulfing her face. This slow visual erasure can be read as a metaphor for the pressures endured by women under the Islamic Republic. censorship, repression, and the erosion of individuality, rendering visible the otherwise invisible forces that suppress self-expression. Handwritten text in both Persian and English appears on the screen, rendered in the artist's own handwriting. These diary-like entries scroll across the frame, moving from right to left and left to right, depending on the language, subtly underscoring the duality of Karamati's identity and the transnational audience. She subsequently relocated to Canada. The use of both languages bridges cultural contexts, reflecting the broader impulse among contemporary Iranian artists to engage with both local and global politics. The text offers a deeply intimate glimpse into Karamati's psyche. She confesses a desire to escape her thoughts through walking, only to find herself trapped within them. Her internal turmoil is conveyed through the repeated crossing out and rewriting of words, evoking a sense of mental disarray and emotional instability. This psychological struggle is set against an unseen but vividly audible external world. Though Karamati never appears outdoors, ambient sounds, footsteps, rustling leaves, traffic, hoots and sirens suggest a parallel life unfolding beyond the frame. As the black liquid slowly consumes her face, her writing grows more hurried and fragmented. Words are hastily erased, suggesting the race against time and a mounting sense of panic. The encroaching darkness interferes with her ability to express herself, while her increasingly labored breathing conveys suffocation, an existential drowning beneath the weight of repression. Just before her face is fully eclipsed, her final words appear on the screen. At last, I find myself walking on the streets of this city while I am faceless. The phrase lingers as a haunting reflection on the erasure of identity and the paradox of visibility and anonymity experienced by many women navigating both private and public forms of constraint. The face as a primary identifier and gateway to identity plays a central role in the video. Its obliteration draws attention to the imposition of a state-defined identity that seeks to erase individual identity, particularly for women. This obliteration conveys a dual meaning: the state's desire to suppress individuality and perhaps the individual's own need to guard or conceal the true self as a form of resistance. By erasing her face, Karamati critiques both external pressures and societal preconceptions, rejecting the gaze and its imposed narrative. Similarly, handwriting emerges as another significant marker of identity in Karamati's work. The jumbled and chaotic handwriting, interspersed with repeated corrections, becomes a visual representation of her internal conflict and fragmented thoughts. It reflects a state of mind that is both unsettled and searching, mirroring the complexities of identity in a context shaped by personal and cultural tensions. The juxtaposition of languages not only conveys a sense of hybridity, but also emphasizes the challenges of self-expression when navigating multiple identities. The corrections within the text suggest an ongoing process of negotiation and re-evaluation, pointing to an identity that is dynamic rather than fixed. In this way, handwriting functions as a deeply personal, yet universally resonant symbol of identity in flux, underscoring the intricate interplay between language, culture, and self-perception. The video's elements, such as the face and handwriting, are thus deeply tied to the artist's personal identity, while the veil and black ink symbolize an imposed uniformity that contrasts with these individual markers. This tension highlights the struggle between selfhood and social conformity. As a result, even as the artist's face becomes fully obscured by the video's end, the consistent sound of her breathing and footsteps convey a quiet yet powerful defiance, symbolizing her refusal to be erased. Together, these elements collectively subvert traditional markers of identity, challenging and redefining the frameworks that attempt to constrain individuality. Moreover, in many cases, Iranian women artists use self-representational strategies that are overtly performative, staging and scripting the self to embody the personas and identities society and the state impose on them, even as these performances collide with their own complex desires. These works foreground the tension between externally imposed demands and the formation of internal subjectivity, revealing how identity itself becomes choreographed under conditions of patriarchal oversight and social expectation. As Butler argues, performativity is not a singular or intentional act, but a continual reiteration of norms that, through repetition, become naturalized and mistaken for inherent truths. What appears theatrical in these performances is precisely the effect of this obscured history. The genealogies of gendered norms are concealed, rendering their enactment simultaneously ordinary and estranged. Because their origins can never be fully disclosed, a residual theatricality remains in every iteration. Gender thus emerges not as an inner essence, but as an ongoing performance, one characterized by fragmentation, irony, and constant possibility of failure, as well as moments of self-scrutiny and reevaluation. It is in this context that Butler's later discussion of parody becomes especially salient. The use of parody exposes the fiction of natural gender identities by exaggerating them to the point where their constructed nature becomes visible. Through imitation with a difference, parody draws attention to the instability of the norms it reproduces. Yet, as Butler emphasizes, not all parody is inherently subversive. Only those parodic acts that challenge the foundational assumptions of gender norms, particularly the binary distinctions between masculinity and femininity, possess the capacity to disrupt dominant ideologies. Parody may at times inadvertently reinforce the very ideals it seeks to critique by implying the existence of an authentic or natural identity against which the performance is measured. However, as Butler insists, the failure to fully conform to such an identity is universal rather than exceptional. No gender performance ever perfectly embodies the norms it cites. This inherent failure is precisely what gives parody its subversive potential. The implications of Butler's argument are particularly resonant within the Iranian context, where women are required to perform a specific state-sanctioned version of pious Islamic womanhood. This enforced performance renders the constructed and theatrical nature of gender especially visible. Consequently, the performativity of gender becomes a persistent motif in the practices of many Iranian women artists, whose representation of women frequently hinge on the repeated, exaggerated, I was supposed to show you this beforehand, sorry. Consequently, the performativity of gender becomes a persistent motif in the practices of many Iranian women artists, whose representation of women frequently hinge on the repeated, exaggerated, or mimetic enactment of state and socially sanctioned roles. Their practices foregrounds the dissonance between imposed identities and lived experiences, revealing the mechanisms through which gender is regulated and the cracks through which it may be subverted. Positioned within a society that demands strict adherence to prescribed ideals of femininity, these artists use performativity and parody to uncover the instability of those ideals, exposing gender as a mutable and contested field rather than an innate fixed essence. Ghazal is an artist who often employs parody and performance as powerful tools to critique and examine these societal expectations. In her ongoing mini-series, mostly shot in Iran, she films herself in short, home movie-style videos, engaging in everyday activities such as ice skating, boxing, skiing, and sunbathing, as well as offering reflections on topics ranging from family history to personal aspirations, all while wearing a traditional chador. These seemingly incongruous actions are underscored by subtitles in English and both. The performative quality of these videos creates both intimacy and distance. By referencing Western iconography and concepts such as feminism, a term that does not exist in for Botticelli's Venus, Ghazal creates a bridge for Western audiences, contrasting their familiarity with this symbol against the unfamiliarity of a veiled woman. This juxtaposition not only draws attention to cultural dissonances, but also challenges stereotypes, exposing the layers of identity, gender, and cultural expectation. In this manner, Ghazal draws a contrast between the physical freedom associated with the Western cult of the body and the limited physical mobility that comes with wearing veil, but also deliberately embraces a symbol of cross-cultural misunderstanding, one that remains a central point of contention between competing ideology, specifically the visibility and control of the female body. However, she subverts the symbol, both literally and metaphorically, challenging the dominant narrative surrounding Iranian women. The Real series is therefore deliberate parody and performance, with viewers, at least Iranian ones, aware that the artist is playing a role. The ironic distance created through mimicry, amplified by the character, Ghazal herself, never directly addressing or acknowledging the viewer, enables a subtle resistance and subversive reimagining of the representation being imitated. These performances function as ironic self-portraits, encapsulating Ghazal's sense of absurdity as she navigates the complexities of existing between two cultures. They portray an individual embodying the contradiction of a world marked by the constant negotiation of conflicting cultural norms, offering a nuanced exploration of feminine identity within such a dynamic and often fraught commons. Furthermore, by appropriating the controversial symbol of the veil, Ghazal confronts the complexities of translating Eastern identities into Western contexts and vice versa. This is especially cogent given the contentious history of the veil in Ghazal's adopted country, France, which, despite its democratic principles, witnessed the so-called Affaire de Foulard, affairs of the scarves, between 1994 and 2003, during which nearly 100 middle and high school students were suspended or expelled for wearing headscarves in class. The veiled Muslim woman thus becomes a provocative figure in Ghazal's work, positioned as the antithesis of Western ideals. By staging mundane tasks and highlighting universal aspirations such as its desire for beauty or independence, Ghazal humorously asserts, however, that Muslim women are not so different from the Western counterparts, exposing sameness and difference alike as simplistic constructs. In doing so, Ghazal critiques these rigid binaries while interrogating the cultural and ideological assumptions that sustain them. By incorporating subtitles, she further amplifies the voice of the Muslim woman, rendering her experiences and aspirations legible to a Western audience. This strategy highlights the universality of human desires while compelling viewers to confront their own preconceptions and engage with the nuanced reality of identity, representation, and cultural translation. Ghazal's character thus resists the stereotype of the passive Muslim woman by pursuing everyday activities with agency and humor and becoming the protagonist of her own story. Ultimately, she invites viewers to look beyond appearances and engage with the layered complexities of cultural identity in a globalized world. The art of this new generation of female Iranian artists therefore works to deconstruct fixed meanings. It is alterity articulated through the guise of conformity. Their practices frequently adopt the visual language of the state, such as the veil or censorship, as a strategic aesthetic rendering these signs subversive in order to critique dominant narratives and open up a plurality of, at times, conflicting interpretations. Mimicry, at its core, involves blending into one's surrounding, a tactic evident both in the natural world and in human warfare through the use of camouflage. In a colonial context, Homi Bhabha argues mimicry signals a desire to produce an other who is similar yet never fully identical to the colonizer. Its ambivalence is fundamental. Mimicry depends upon the continual generation of difference that ultimately destabilizes colonial authority. As such, mimicry represents the complex interplay between regulatory control, disciplinary power, and the appropriation of the colonizers' visual and cultural symbols. It is marked by a striking paradox: emulation of the dominant culture that simultaneously conceals and subtly reveals the asymmetries of power embedded within the act of imitation. Through appropriating the colonizer's signifiers, the colonized negotiate a space of agency, transforming those same symbols into tools of contestation and redefinition. Within this framework, mimicry operates both as an instrument of regulation and as a mode of resistance, exposing the fraught negotiation of identity, cultural adaptation, and the tension between assimilation and assertion. Luz Irigaray offers a parallel reading within patriarchal context, contending that women were historically restricted to a single mode of social participation, mimicry. Conforming to prescribed feminine roles required women to actively affirm norms that were often restrictive and disempowering. Yet this very compliance enabled a subtle form of resistance. By inhabiting these roles self-consciously, women carved out spaces of agency within the structures that constrained them. Mimicry thus becomes a method of negotiating patriarchal expectations from within, allowing women to destabilize them without overt confrontation. Irigaray's account underscores the complexity of women's historical maneuvering within patriarchal limits. Through mimicry, women use the limited tools available to them to initiate internal forms of subversion, engaging established discourses while quietly reshaping them. Mimicry emerges, therefore, as an intricate mode of resistance, one that recognizes constraint yet leverages repetition and performance to expose its mechanism. Rather than remaining confined to their assigned roles, women use mimicry to exceed them, revealing the submerged potential of the feminine and challenging the assumption of passive absorption into dominant norms. Marcia Meskimen's theorization of feminist renegotiation of traditions similarly foregrounds mimesis as a strategy of transformation rather than assimilation. In this framework, mimesis entails imitation that does not replicate tradition uncritically, but instead reinterprets and reorients it through a feminist lens. Crucially, this approach refuses to speak from an absolute or totalizing position. Feminist engagement with tradition becomes processual, interrogative, and open-ended. By entering into dialogue with traditions through mimesis and mimicry, feminists expose this gap, contradictions, and exclusions. Tradition thus emerges as a site of negotiation and empowerment, transformed through critical engagement and rearticulation. Within the context of Iranian female artists, mimicry assumes a distinctly multifaceted and deeply subversive character, functioning at once as both an offensive and defensive strategy. Offensively, these artists mobilize mimicry to confront and destabilize state rhetoric, appropriating its visual and discursive forms in order to reveal their contradictions, hypocrisies, and ideological constructions. By mirroring the language of official narrative, they expose the mechanisms of power that sustain them, thereby unsettling the coherence that state seeks to project. Defensively, mimicry becomes a means of navigating censorship and the restrictive condition under which these artists operate. By producing works that appear to align with state expectations, they embed alternative, subversive meanings within ostensibly compliant forms, meanings that elude immediate detection while retaining critical force. This double-coded practice enables artists to work within imposed limits without relinquishing the capacity for critique, cultivating a layered visual vocabulary that communicates both surface conformity and underlying dissent. The strategies of mimicry adopted by Iranian women artists therefore align with theoretical understanding of mimicry as a dynamic processual mode of engagement rather than a stable or oppositional stance. By treating mimicry as an ongoing negotiation, these artists circumvent reductive binaries such as compliance versus resistance and instead expose the complexities of operating within ideologically charged structures. Their mimicry does not seek to replace one authority with another. Rather, it works to dismantle the epistemic and political certainties that underpin dominant narratives. In this way, mimicry becomes a powerful method of negotiation, resistance, and creative transformation. Shahandeh Qadirian, an Iranian artist living and working in Iran, despite many opportunities to leave the country, frequently employs an intuitive form of mimicry to critique the socio-political challenges confronting Iranian. Through her art, she mirrors societal and political norms, subtly imitating and reinterpreting them to expose their inherent contradictions and tensions. This approach allows Qadirian to engage critically with the complex realities of life under a restrictive regime, using mimicry not only as a tool of subversion, but also to navigate the boundaries of censorship. This strategy is exemplified in many of her works, such as her West by East series, where she uses mimicry as a potent form of critique to interrogate the practices of looking and the contrasting censorship of women's body in both Western and Eastern societies. This series originated from a commission by a museum in Barcelona, asking Qadirian to depict Iranian perspectives of the West. In response, Qadirian chose to explore how Iranian women perceive Western women, whose images they only see in Western publications that are censored and altered to align with the regime's strict moral codes. This regime-led censorship in Iran extends to books, magazines, and films, where following the revolution, government censors would use black markers to obscure women's bodies and hair in images, effectively creating makeshift hijabs. As Qadirian sarcastically observes, this was done to protect the public from harms ensued from the body of women. The censorship Qadirian addresses permeates both public and private life in Iran. Beyond media extends to women's bodies, movements, and interactions, forcing women to self-censor as a survival strategy. This includes having to avoid interaction with men in public and dressing according to strict codes. As an artist, Qadirian faces an added layer of censorship. The Ministry of Guidance and Culture closely monitors artworks for any content at odds with state ideology. Qadirian thus navigates a triple bind as a woman, an Iranian, and an artist, acknowledging the pervasive reality of self-centered censorship and the fact that women, above all, are often their own first censors. This practice of censorship forms a critical backdrop to Qadirian's exploration of how imposed narratives shape perceptions of femininity across cultures. Qadirian foregrounds these constraints in her work through parody, while creatively exposing the impact of state control on both identity and artistic expression. She thereby critiques Western ideals of femininity while simultaneously challenging the rigid regulations imposed on women's representation in Iran. Qadirian thus highlights the pervasive authority of the state in defining morally permissible imagery while exposing the complex and often contradictory ways women are scrutinized and objectified across cultural boundaries. To achieve this, Qadirian weaves together dual acts of mimicry to convey a nuanced commentary. Initially, she utilizes mimicry by staging her friends and family in poses reminiscent of models depicted in Western fashion magazines. This act mirrors the idealized Western beauty standards that these magazines often promote. However, Qadirian's mimicry goes beyond mere imitation. She adds a layer of gloss over the subjects on which she paints black markings that mimic the censoring marks employed by the Iranian regime. This dual mimicry encapsulates the tension between two contrasting realms, the allure of the female figure in Western imagery and the restricted censorship policies in Iran. In the first layer of mimicry, Qadirian critiques the objectification of women in Western media and the commodification of their bodies. By replicating the poses of fashion models, she draws attention to the widespread, both Western and non-Western, fixation on Western beauty ideals, youth, and perfection, exposing how these visual norms shape cultural perception and reinforce homogenized standards of desirability. Simultaneously, the second layer of mimicry addresses essential censorship practices in Iran that attempt to erase and control women's bodies and expression. By superimposing the censoring marks onto her subjects' bodies, Katayoun challenges the authority of these censoring mechanisms and comments on the broader suppression of women's agency within Iranian society. Additionally, by assuming the role of the censor herself, Katayoun effectively undermines and strips it of its authority, exposing its absurdity and arbitrariness and turning it into a tool of critique rather than repression. This deliberate mimicry shifts the narrative as Katayoun, rather than being subjected to censorship, reclaims it as a performative act that challenges the legitimacy of such control. The subversive approach highlights the restrictive nature of these measures while simultaneously transforming them into a means of empowerment and resistance. In doing so, she repositions the act of erasure, making it a lens through which the audience can question the very structures of power and ideology behind censorship. This intricate interplay of mimicry allows Katayoun to create a space for critical reflection on the convergence of objectification, censorship, and gender dynamics in both Western and Eastern contexts. This paper has examined how selected contemporary Iranian women artists employ visual strategies to challenge patriarchal constraints and articulate alternative visions of female subjectivity. By foregrounding the lived experiences within a repressive sociopolitical landscape, their practices emerge as a critical feminist intervention that unsettle both local gender paradigms and global Orientalist assumptions. Rejecting narratives of passive victimhood, these artists assert agency, complexity, and resistance, positioning the female body not as a site of regulation, but as a locus of critical inquiry and self-definition. Through their exploration of the body, self-representation, and embodied experience, these artists expose the complex process through which identity is negotiated under intersecting themes of gender, nationalism, and ideological oversight. Their work disrupts dominant visual codes, prompting viewers to confront the tensions between modernity and tradition, visibility and erasure, compliance and subversion. Rather than reinforcing fixed binaries, their practice illuminate the layered and often contradictory realities of Iranian womanhood as it is shaped by overlapping cultural, religious, political, and social forces. Ultimately, by reimagining the feminine self through performative, ironic, and politically charged visual vocabularies, these artists offer new modes of seeing, being, and knowing. Their work underscores the necessity of multiplicity, nuance, and cultural specificity in understanding gendered resistance, not as a universal feminist script, but as a situated and dynamic negotiation within shifting local and global. In doing so, they expand the parameter of what feminist art can be and do, contributing to a broader reconfiguration of contemporary art history that moves beyond Western-centric frameworks. Their practices not only challenges the constraints that seek to contain them, but also forge imaginative futures where the complexities of Iranian women's lives speak on their own terms and claim their rightful place within global artistic and intellectual discourse. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for this very rich and complex talk, and for your strong and quite outspoken interpretations. And the works that you showed are both plural at times, but they're also very moving, I find. I was interested in your interpretation of parody as a subversive, with all the subversive potential that it has. So thank you very much for that. Let's see if there are questions, answers.
Oh, like we have some of the artists on the online as well. Katayoun carry a big shout out to her. Yes. Sohaila, Shahandeh. So yes, we have some of the artists.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I hope my interpretations was all right.
Well, we go to the chat. Please, friends and colleagues on the online, write your comments in the chat. But any questions or any comments here? Yes.
I have a question. Thank you very much, first of all, for opening the window on what is happening right now in the comments that we see in Iran by the window, and it's very interesting. So thank you for that. My impression, and tell me if I understood well, is that there is a shared, there is a continuity between the issues that women are encountering and in Iran at the moment, even though evidently in Iran they are heightened by the political situation that can exacerbate the condition of women. At one point, though, you have highlighted in particular one paragraph about mimicry that you cited, and my understanding in that very paragraph is that continues by saying that mimicry, by definition, is always partial in order to put the culture that is mimicked as inferior and partial. So never fully complete, never fully understood. I was trying to understand why you decided to use the word mimicry instead of, say, imitation or parody, which was, as we mentioned, very well leveraged. Because we saw that in different artists, and there was an innate sense of humor that really kind of give us a little bit of a...
Yeah, well, mimicry, it's because it is a feminist term, so, and specifically, and also post-colonial term, so I use specifically mimicry, and it's mimicry of the dominant culture. And in this case, for example, with the use of veiling, with the use with Shahdeh's work, and there's other works that were there using a lot of the strategies of the state. So by imitating that, they are imitating that. So it's a form of mimicry to show its absurdity. So it's not a mimicry that is just, oh, they're just copying. They're not copying. It's mimicry, also its intention is to show the underlying absurdity of the original. In that form, in the sense that is a feminist sense and post-colonial sense that I use. So not a regular mimicry.
I do understand the use you're making, but since you were very strong on identifying continuity, if you use more mimicry, you highlight let's say, the opposition between the two entities. It's a deliberate choice. So I was trying to understand which one is what. Is it a matter of having a continuity of the woman condition throughout East and West, or is rather having an opposition on how women are treated, according to these artists in Iran in particular?
No, I think it's both. And a lot of the works, and also on Ghazal's work that I showed, and also there's other works that I didn't show because I wanted to concentrate on less work and sort of talk about them more. What they do is they are not saying, just criticizing Iran and saying, you know, everything is hunky-dory in the West. They are critical of both the West and Iran. It's a dual, and I think that is why in the work that I was showing, it was being critical of both. And most of the artists are critical of both. It's not singular criticism. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes.
Thank you very much. But what I noticed that it is great to see all this, but I was hoping to see something after 2002.
Oh, there is
Is
something.
it?
Yes.
We didn't see currently because things has changed now.
Yes. So
especially the last 5-6 years.
Oh, no, we have Soheila's work, Soheila Sohambar's work was 2023. But that is the works that I showed particularly in this, but no, there was 2008, no, 2009, then there was 2012, I think. Azel's series is an ongoing series, for example. It's not, I put those particular ones that I took were from that period, but they are an ongoing system. And a lot of this is because I wanted to show really at the height of the criticism, and particularly all the laws and all that, it's somewhat different. The imagery has become now far more overtly critical. So this was a certain period where it was still very much couched in metaphor and allegory, which is why I wanted to show these, which were the examples that best showed my argument. But now it's very overt. There's no more like complete criticism. There is no hiding under these mechanisms so much.
Thank you.
Casey John, thank you very much for the lovely presentation. I really enjoyed that. So as an Iranian female artist, I just wanted to ask, which form of expression or representation do you think is most effective in terms of communicating the message?
You mean which media?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think after the revolution, obviously painting is something that requires training, so it is not as accessible. So after the revolution, a lot of women, so a lot of these artists started with photography. And then afterwards, like performance, video installation. And these are things that are accessible. They don't require photography to some extent, yes, needs a training, but to do like video and things, less so. And it's more accessible. It doesn't require like a huge amount of investment, which something like painting does. So I think really what took off the most after the revolution in those first years was photography, just because of the fact that it was just so easily accessible for artists.
Yeah, I agree.
You agree too.
Good.
Yes. Thank you for the interval. I want to ask, like, because you mentioned this is like post-revolution. So like before the revolution, number one, were there like female artists who were speaking out on it on such a loud level? That's like the first question. And then the second question is like, did any of these artists receive like pushback from the government?
Yes.
Were they jailed? Were they like, what was the like situation around those two questions?
Yeah, so before the revolution, there were some Iranian artists, but they were not at all to this level, not at all. I mean, now we have so many wonderful artists. And in a way, it is the fact that, what Shirin Nishad has also said, that, you know, inhospitable climates sort of make certain plants grow. And I think the particular restrictions that the amount of pressure that was put on women made them, after the revolution, want to have some way of artistically expressing themselves. So that was the case. Sorry, you asked another question. Oh, yes, they are continuously monitored. And they cannot show, again, those ones who live in Iran, obviously. Some of them have left, some artists have left, some like Shahandeh Qadirian doesn't want to leave, but often, for example, her work gets rejected. She won for her Qajar series, she won an award, which was then rescinded. They say, no, your image shows Iranian women in bad ways. So then she submitted another image, and that was also rejected. So, and yes, every time they leave the country, they're sort of like monitored, and when they go back, they're questioned. It is, but and then other artists like a lot of like rap singers, and I don't know if you know about it, they're jailed, but they're far more open with the criticism. You know, with art, it's easier to be more subtle.
Actually, for the women artists before the revolution, Sohaila Shahandeh has done quite a lot of work in trying to excavate and making them
Yes.
speak.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. But those are sort of singers and actors. So there was in terms of, yes, we had a lot of singers and actors, but in terms of visual artists, like not that many. There was a handful who are known, but not as much as the male artists. But that's, I think, is the case all over the world. Where women artists were not they didn't have as many opportunities.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And I'm amazed by the quality of the artists themselves. This is really, you showed a little sample, but you know, I'm a little bit aware of the creativity is just astonishing. With plenty of references from within and from without Iran. I mean, it's just so creative. And indeed, it's the dear situation for creativity. There is no doubt about it, and you can see it. And you showed it very nicely. I was wondering, what are the venues where those artwork can be shown in Iran? Because is there a sort of a strategy of showing in the West the most daring pieces, and then showing in Iran less controversial pieces? Or, you know, what are the venues in Iran that allow to show those pieces? Well, I'm thinking about one of the first that you showed with an image of a naked Venus among a patchwork in paintings. One of the first.
That is actually Sohaila Shahandeh, and she is a British Iranian artist.
Right, all right, yeah.
So that is, yes. So this is the artists who are obviously not living in Iran. They have ability. So if you were an artist living in Iran, you could not you could not portray a woman without a veil. Yes. So that is why all the artwork actually has a veiled woman, who a lot of people think it's because they're self-exoticizing. It's not. If they portray a woman who is unveiled, they are not allowed to show the work.
But I saw online, you know, videos that shows venues with a lot of, you know, rap singers, and in Iran, within Iran itself, and a lot of digital artworks and installations that look really, it seems to me that there is a great deal of freedom within these spaces that are obviously, I suppose, are hidden or somehow, you know, hidden. There is sort of underground world of venues that operate, you know, against, I mean, despite the authorities, because I received these videos and I'm just amazed how this can happen in such a context, because there is no, you know, no way to tame the ferocity of these authorities. So how this is working, I'm astounded by this as well.
Well, I mean,
if you haven't,
I mean, if they want to show sort of in legitimate venues, they would need to have the right permissions, etc. There's been sort of exhibitions. There was an exhibition that was going to be shown on the work, sort of artists depicting Furukh Farrokhzad, who is a very beloved feminist poet who died many years ago. And at the last minute, the Ministry of Culture closed and said, no, you can't do it because they're so sensitive about Forough Farrokhzad, because even to this day, women try to go to her grave, young girls, everyone has grown up. So there is a lot of pushback on it. And this is with everything. There was just on the news that there's this singer, Shervin, whose song became the sort of the anthem of the Woman Like Freedom uprising, and they wouldn't let him work, they wouldn't let him do anything, he couldn't go anywhere. And then after 3 years, he actually had to get permission from the government to release an album, and they had to sort of vet it and everything. And everyone turned on him and say, oh, are you working now with the Islamic Republic? So there is this, you know, they're caught between a rock and a hard place, because if they sort of like try to appease the regime, people turn on them. If they don't, then they can't work. And, you know, obviously they're artists, they need to work, they need to make a living, they've got to eat. So it's very tough navigating this as artists in Iran.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I'm quite interested in the idea of Iran,
Yes.
and then the West, as if there's kind of nothing in between. And a lot of the artists, Farsi and English, for example, and even your question about, you know, is the work shown in Iran or is it shown in Western galleries? What about galleries, you know, around the world, and the interaction of Iran with neighboring countries, for example? I'm just quite interested about that. That's more of a comment. My question is about how you deal with discussing these artists, and without avoiding Islamophobic tropes. For example, you know, critiquing the Iranian state and some of the rules that they have there, without perpetuating ideas about like Islam being inherently patriarchal, or the idea of, you know, censoring the one artist who is using the marker pen to censor, and that being like a makeshift hijab, for example. Like, what's the line between critiquing the state and actually making quite derogatory statements about Islam? That I think it's difficult to navigate it, but I'm just curious about.
Well, in that particular work, she was not critiquing Islam. What she was critiquing is the way the Islamic Republic censors everything. So art books, for example, there are art books that they would, you know, students at university would have. All the images are censored. So like the Venus, you know, all of that has got this black marker on it. So they cannot see any images of women. So that was her criticism. You know, obviously in other Muslim countries that is not the case. They don't go around obliterating the image of women. So it was not, none of this is, you know, addressed to, you know, Islam, rather, very, very much so that it's not. But so it is really critiquing a very specific mentality or practices that come out of the Islamic Republic, rather than addressing all Muslims, or all, because all of them are Muslims themselves, and they are also very much critiquing how they are viewed as terrorists, or as by the West. So a lot of these artists, when they try to come abroad for their shows, and in fact, one of the artists that happened where she was trying to come to the UK, and she couldn't get her visa. She couldn't get the visa, and her work is shown in all these all the museums everywhere. She couldn't get a visa. She got denied a visa. And that is something that is So obviously, and even when they have had, a lot of them are critical about the interpretation of the work in the West, because a lot of it is from this viewpoint that, oh, this is against Islam, as you said, but that's not what they're trying to say. And they're not even critiquing the veil. They are critiquing the enforcement of it.
Tyranny.
Yes, yes, that it should be a woman's right to choose or not choose. That's all that they are critiquing, really. Okay.
Salma Majid, thank you, Katayoun, for a very informative talk. Any other comments here? Yes?
Oh,
No. Okay.
Yeah, just because I don't want somebody else.
Go ahead.
No, I'm the very beautiful Christic image of a girl. Yes, this is, but it's not the only one. This is just particularly aesthetic, but also, I mean, the signs and I mean, just the quality of the artwork is just mind blowing. But this particular image brought to my mind. Actually, it didn't look to me like borrowing from Christian imagery so much, because it brought to my mind this imagery, pre-revolution imagery of Hussein and what I call the Sagrada Familia of you know those imageries in the 20th century that really looks like paintings, Western paintings, even before the revolution, but in the context of Iranian Shiism, those imagery with Hussein that looks like Christ, you know, and the composition of the family, and they look like images of the Sagrada Familia in let's say modernist ways of figuring those sacred Shia figures.
Yeah, but
there is and also this image of Muhammad, you remember this picture of Muhammad like a Bacchus.
yes, I mean,
So you have all this connection, pre-revolution connection between a way of presenting sacred figures and in Iran and in the West. So you have this very old pre-revolution confusion between. So it's not. It actually, this image is just to me in line with this old, not that old, but less recent heritage of, you know, connection between Iranian and European art.
well, this one is very much because it is a crucified, like a.
Yes, of course, but also you have. So it's not that, yes, definitely, but this is, you can see that there is a legacy of looking at this Christian imagery of martyrdom or sacred figures, that because I remember seeing those posters and those images that are also like panels that are displayed in public assurances, festivities, and so on.
No, it's sure, because I cannot. I was trying to see if I can to that image, but I can't. Yes, I mean, I think it's a very and her other was
Came to my mind.
yes, no, Katayoun Karami's work is very, very clever and very nuanced. So there are so many layers to unpack. Like in this, there was so many different layers to unpack, from the imagery, from the words she uses, from the. So yes, there is.
And the beauty of these imageries, like the beauty. I found also that I don't remember. Yeah, it's her with the erasing. She turns the figure into calligraphies, figurative calligraphies.
Yes.
So this is how the work is not only talkative and discursive, but also very creative in plasticity, because you have this reconfiguration of a woman figure that looks like mixed up with calligraphy. See the one. So these arrangers are transforming a sort of elegant, very modernist way of turning the woman into a calligraphic woman.
Yes.
It's
They're very creative. I think Iranian
So you have
artists are just
this aspect of the aesthetics and the plasticity of these artworks that makes them so powerful. That in my opinion needs to be even more investigated. And in particular, all the different influences and legacies. One of the series also made me think of Cindy Sherman.
yes.
Of course, so how is this working? This is very concrete. We are not anymore in the metaphor. We are in a very concrete presentation in which the artists are metamorphosing, morphing themselves with accessories and so you have all this aspect of plasticity that are very that needs, in my opinion, to be even more investigated, because they are powerful and they carry this discourse so well because of the plasticity of the art.
Yes.
Let's see if there is any other questions.
It's not a question. Well, firstly, thank you so much, Katayoun. It was a really insightful discussion. I actually just wanted to contribute something small to what you said with regards to art displays in Iran, because I visited this year after about 9 years, and I've really noticed a strong shift in art displays and practice following the women life freedom movement,
Yes.
because really everywhere I went, there were very overt displays of female figures, nudity, whether it was in restaurants, whether it was in museums. I was absolutely surprised. I mean, for instance, I went to Asad Abad complex.
Yes, I know. Yes.
But there was a beautiful sculpture of a woman's figure right in the middle of the park. It wasn't even really tucked away or anything. And I don't know if it's been there for years, perhaps it's not, a recent thing, but just to say that I think following the protests, I think people have become more emboldened to sort of
Yes.
display these more, in the eyes of the regime, provocative acts or artistic expressions. And I think there's also quite a strong underground art movement that I don't know so much about, but I know it's very much thriving, especially amongst the youth. So I think art displays are, of course, the regime is particularly strict now more than ever, possibly, but I don't think it makes a difference so much with, I think young people are so bold and so brave these days that they're fighting back more and more. And so, it wasn't much, but I just wanted to comment that I observed that everywhere I went, in restaurants, in shops, it was incredible.
Also women themselves, young women, they're walking out without the veil.
Exactly.
Short sleeves,
That's in
completely.
the big cities, not everywhere.
That's
No,
everywhere.
even in this moment.
I went to a very small town that was very religious, and I was utterly surprised to see a woman without hijab. Not to say that equates to, as we said before, it's a matter of choice.
Yes.
So for me, it doesn't matter really, but it's just to say that there are women who, were visibly unveiled.
I think as Iranians who don't live there, if you go back, you're still scared and you think, oh, I've got to be covered, and you're quite taken aback by the fact that so many people are just walking out. So it's not shock about seeing an unveiled woman, it's the shock about the bravery that it involves to walk out like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I just follow up on the comment the lady in front said about the other kind of Gulf Arab countries and how they receive this Iranian art. Does it resonate very closely, or is there a separation in the way it's received?
I think there's a big market of Iranian artwork in Dubai and in the Emirates. I don't know if they're as well known. I was in Saudi, and I don't think that I didn't see anywhere that represented them in Saudi, but I think certainly they do know about the artwork. Particularly, I think they find it, especially the women from the region, they find the work inspirational. But Certainly in Dubai and the UAE, they are well represented with the big auction houses as well there. So,
Any other question? Right, you must be exhausted. So Hela, how are the artists in Iran dealing with the female figure in contrast?
Sohaila, this is my lovely Sohaila artist. Everyone
So
knows Sohaila. Everyone's
I'll repeat this. Sohaila Sohandeh asks, how are the male artists in Iran dealing with the female figure as a contrast?
You mean how they, I think she's saying how they portray the female figure. I think they're scared to portray the female figure, the male artists, because women are, yes, I think to a large extent they do not, contrary to sort of like before. I think men do not so much portray women, certainly not as a there is no male artist who like just portrays like in as you would have seen in the West, where people are just portraying sort of images of women. I don't really see that. And anyway, I tend to work more with female artists. But I have not really seen that much of people like Feridun Ave and all that. They do mostly figures of men. Unless you know something, Sohaila. So you tell me. But I have not really seen that much. Oh, she agrees with me. Good. That's a test. Sohaila's my dear, dear, dear best friend in the world. So she's just trying to give me a hard time asking the questions.
Great. Well, if there isn't any other urgent question, thank you very much, Kathy.
Right.